I'm Shelley Rubenstein. I'm one of the trustees and I'm very pleased to be here. I've been judging the awards and I'm always really impressed and happy to share hints and tips with you.
Thanks, Shelley. And then my other colleague, Lisa.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Lisa Crichton-Jones. I'm Director of People and OD up in the Northeast at Gateshead Trust now, and have been involved with HPMA for a few years now in terms of judging and in terms of submitting applications. So really pleased to join Nikki and Shelley this afternoon.
Okay, so we're all here as judges because we've all judged. Myself and Lisa submitted awards when I was did a proper job as a HR director, and award winners as well. So hopefully we can share some of that wisdom. We can't guarantee that following this session that you will win. That's no guarantee given. It's just to give you some hints and tips to hopefully help you on your way to submitting a really good entry for the awards. So the first thing, I've got a number of slides, but as there's only a small group, if you've got any questions along the way, either put your hand up or put some questions in the chat and I'll keep a lookout on what's in there. I'm going to just share my screen now. So we've done that bit. Oh, now it won't move on. Something always breaks, doesn't it? Let me stop that share. Start again. Bear with. Right. So what we're going to cover is just the key information that you need to look at. And some of this is common sense, but sometimes we don't always follow common sense when we're so passionate about something we want to submit. So the first thing to do is look at what the criteria is for the award. This is before you're thinking of entering, what's the criteria for each of the awards? Because there are some awards that you may not consider putting in for, that your award may actually sit better in that area. So just think broad. What questions do you need to respond to? Making sure you answer those questions. Is there a word limit, which there tends to be? Can you add to the entry? Can you add appendices? That may be something you want to consider. How do you submit the entry? And what are the key dates? So key dates is really important. So when's the closing date? You have had a number of pleas, so can you extend it? But we are very tight for time in terms of the turnaround because of the judging process and how long things take. So make sure you're aware of the closing date. Make sure you're aware of the shortlisting date. So shortlisting, long listing is done, and then shortlisting from that, and then you'd be invited to, if you've been shortlisted, to present at the judges' judging day. So you need that date in diary as well. And then obviously the most important day, which is the awards party, which at the moment this year is still planned to be virtual because of COVID and restrictions. But hopefully we'll have a massive party when we all can and make the most of it. But again, make sure those dates are in your schedule. And for those people you may want to come with you to do the judging or indeed the awards. I'll try and move this out of the way. So, should you enter? This is the first question you need to ask yourself. I mean, HR, workforce, OD professionals, we're all very hide our achievements under a bushel. We don't shout about the immense things that we're doing, and we need to shout more. So every organisation without exception will have something that they could submit to the awards. And if that happened, we'd be judging for about a year because there's so many organisations, but that's a good thing in some respects. So should you enter, what's your story? And I think looking at it through the lens of a storyteller is pretty important and pretty good advice when you're submitting your award. Bearing in mind, we do get a number of entries per award. Judges may be judging more than one category. It's important that yours stands out from the page, if you see what I mean. So is it compelling? Does it draw you in to want to read more? What difference have you made? So being able to demonstrate the impact of your story. So whatever you've done, what difference has it made? Made to patients, service users, public, population and staff. Do you have enough evidence? So sometimes people submit really good award entries, but they tend to be too short a time scale to be able to demonstrate the return on the investment. So think, if you've done something for a year, do you have the quantifiable results to be able to share, or would it be better waiting another 12 months? Then you will have more information. Many award entries actually forget to describe what they've actually done. So think about what did you actually do? Can you demonstrate, as I say, with statistics, the return on investment, whether that be qualitative, so that could be sound bites from staff who have gone through the initiative, or patients who have benefited. So think about staff, think about patients, think about service users, and think about population at large, because obviously we're working across systems now as well. So do you have people, as I just said, who could write a testimonial that supports your entry, that's really benefited from the initiative, the area that you're submitting for? And then a really important point is what logistics you need to consider. So sign off. So sometimes the award entry needs to be supported by a senior member of the workforce team, so usually the director or deputy. Make sure they're not on 4 weeks in Bermuda, which they won't be this side of May, so that's not a problem. But if they're not on leave, what the timescales are involved in terms of submitting, and that's just in terms of the steps I'll take you through shortly. And as I say, the closing date. So before you even take pen to paper or get your laptop out and start to type, look at the categories, read every single one to make sure that you're submitting for the right category and the most appropriate for what you've got to share. Make sure you've got clear key messages for the project. So as I said before, make sure yours stands out. The judges want to know straight away what it is you're trying to what story you're telling, what are you sharing. So think about, how you can, sometimes, I mean, last year I was shortlisting, I had to go through 30 submissions, 2 separate categories, but again, it's making sure that your award stands out from the others. And I'm sure Lisa and Shelley may have something, can't get my words out, something to share on that later on. Talk to colleagues. So talk to people that are with you on your journey around what your project or your initiative is, because that can help you shape ideas, collate what you've got to add to your story, what measures you can use to illustrate the impact, and what testimonials or feedback you may have had. And just think, one statistic per key message. What's one of the weakest areas in all the award entries tends to be the return on investment. So what is it that your project, your initiative has given? How can you illustrate that with statistics? So it could be that your initiative has had a positive impact on reducing sickness absence or improving attendance, depending on how you want to frame it. Or it could have reduced turnover. It could have reduced patient harm. There are a number of things to consider, but thinking about that, both quantitative and qualitative examples, is really important, because that tends to be the weaker area of all entries that we see. And sometimes it's hard, but you need to really think through that lens. How do I illustrate that this has had an impact, and how and why and what? So then moving to, let me just move that up, writing the award. So thinking the reader who's reading your entry doesn't know anything about your project, may not know anything about your organisation. How are you going to write it so straight away they can understand it and get curious about what is to come in the entry? Look at the criteria, which we'll look at some criteria in a moment. Map your evidence against that criteria, because that's how you're judged and ultimately shortlisted, hopefully. Involve some colleagues who can support the writing of your entry. They can be helping you get additional information to help you tell your story. And then write it without worrying about word count in the first instance. Then it's always helpful to get someone who knows nothing about the project. So fresh eyes, it could be your partner at home, it could be somebody in the office, anyone that doesn't know much about the project, get them to read through it. Fresh eyes, so that they can see, yes, you've made the entry against the criteria, yes, they understand what it's about, but you could strengthen this area. I'm not sure that adds anything, and could be your critical friend throughout the writing the award. And then, as I said earlier, make sure you build in time for final sign-off, because I'd hate anybody to be ready to submit, then realising they can't get their sign-off that they need before the deadline. Now it's frozen again. Oh. Why did nothing go well today? I think it was Friday. I'm just going to start, see if I can get it up again. Sorry, it's stuck. It must be me. Maybe it's Zoom. It's not working today.
Look at that rare thing called the sun, Nikki. That's in the sky today. Yeah.
I know, I am hot actually. It's not going on to the next slide. So let me just talk it. I've got them in front of me, and we will share them just so that to see where we're up to. Yeah, so signing off. So how do you get your entry to stand out from the others? But it's thinking through, can your project, your initiative, can it be adopted across the health sector, but also maybe other sectors, so other public sectors? And I think, you know, private sector can learn quite a lot of what we do. So think about how it can be adapted easily across the sector. How have you shared the learning from what you're doing? So being willing to, which we are in HR and OD, we tend to be quite open about sharing what we've achieved and sharing some of the information. So being willing to share, you may have shared it with other colleagues in your networks. So again, you know, how you're helping sharing the learning from what you've done with others. So it's a benefit ultimately to everyone in the NHS, but thinking other sectors as well. Say what difference your project initiative makes to patients, service users, population, staff. I've said that already, but it's really important about that patient perspective, that service user perspective, and really thinking, you know, what impact has, because everything we do in workforce, we have hands on staff who have hands on patients, service users, therefore we're making a difference. So thinking that logical lens. Have you cracked a problem that everyone else is coping with and nobody else has managed to solve? So thinking through how you might, again, share that you know, there's been a major issue that's been in the NHS forever, but you've managed to crack it. Is yours a no or low budget solution? So we're very good in the NHS of doing a lot with not much at all. We're very good at that in the HPMA. But if it's a low cost, low budget, then clearly it's more applicable and people can actually share it and implement it in their own organisations. So again, we look for creativity, innovation, how people have been thinking about how they do things with no budget or limited budget. I'm not saying that should be the case, because I think workforce should deserve more budget, but realistic about where we are at the current time. Demonstrate your hunger. So this is where your passion really comes out for what it is you're sharing, about wanting to continually improve how things work in your organisation, your system, your population, and ultimately nationally in the NHS. So, you know, your passion to improve and develop, but also to learn, because there may be things that you've done through your implementation that you wouldn't do again. So again, reflection and thinking about what it is you've done and what you've learned from it. And then finally, seeking out people who have been touched by the initiative or project. So one or two where there's real evidence that add to your, that really, I suppose, tell your story and it gives it context. It's really sharing somebody's personal experience of what you've done and what difference it's made to them personally. So this is about hearts and minds, really talking to that. So when you look at the the categories, there's a number of categories and each of them have criteria, and then each of them have sorry, distracted by a phrase question there, sorry, and each of them have submission questions that you want to respond to. So one of the awards this year is Capsticks Award for Innovation. So the key word there is innovation. So they're looking for cutting edge, nobody's done this before, or nobody's done it in the way you've done it. So creativity, within the spheres of workforce. Now this year we've made sure that the language is all encompassing of the diversity of what sits under workforce, because previous years it's been very focused on HR, but workforce is very much more about HR. So again, we've broadened it to make sure that that captures the diversity of the portfolio. So I'll just stop there. Freya, the slides will be shared. They've just broken down, but we'll get them shared and sent out to you. So if you look at the CAP 6 Award for Innovation, the criteria is evidence of true innovation, not simply new ways of working or implementing policy. So there will be things that you're doing in your organisation that are quite creative. And a lot of this, I think COVID has been challenging, but I think it's really provided a strong foundation and springboard for the profession. So think about what's your evidence that supports that. Clear demonstration of need. So why did you have to implement that particular project or initiative? Details of the process. How did you implement it? Who did you get on board? And how did you work with staff side colleagues? Those types of things. So it's not just one person's idea and they implement it. How they collaborated to really get behind this particular innovation. What you plan to do, maybe further research, development, for evaluation. So if it's an area you've done a pilot, you've done that pilot for 2 years, the results are showing really positive outcomes. How can you share that? Could it be a piece of research you want to do to build on that? And making sure that that's again looked at in your evidence. Then the final criteria in that category is the potential for the transfer of learning. So this is where I say it's really important, because we are a learning organisation as the NHS, but particularly as HPMA, want to be able to share and shout from the rooftops about what people are doing and really celebrate what we're doing and its transferability across the sector. And then the submission questions, it says describe your project, including evidence of your project, how it demonstrates innovation, and there's 200 words. Not a lot of words, so you have to really think about what it is that's really pertinent that the judges pick up in those 200 words. So as I say, write it as if you're writing it, then get somebody to look at it and they can perhaps help you extract what the important words are. Then you have to outline the project design, business need and rationale that supports your chosen project. And again, that's 200 words or less. What are the measurable achievements? So this is the bit where you can put your return on investment. So what illustrates and demonstrates its added value, it's made a huge difference. And this section is 400 words. So it does say specifically judges are looking for qualitative and or quantitative metrics. And then outline your plans for further research, development or full evaluation. So how are you going to share it? Are you considering doing more research? How are you going to develop it and build on what you've already achieved? So what are you doing with the outcomes of the project? And then the final area it asks in this section is around what's the potential in learning from the project. So how best could this, I can't read, could this learning be shared? So again, how would you, so some people say, they used to say, well, we'll have open days and we'll share what we're doing. Clearly at the moment that's not applicable, but you may say we'd actually do a webinar on it, one of the HPMA series, we want to share what we're doing, we'd do a Zoom event, we'd do, we'd share best practice through a case study, you name it, can go into that section. So it's the criteria is quite clear, then the submission questions are quite clear, and the number of words that goes with each one. You can't go over the number, you can go under, but again it's important bearing in mind the judges are reading several of these entries for the same category. Get yours to stand out in terms of what you're trying to get across. So it's a bit like the elevator pitch. What are the words that you will use to get the interest of the person that you're talking to, that they want to know more and they're curious to know more. Just nearly finished. Moving on to judging. So I think Lauren's on the call if there's any particular technical questions around how we do the judging. But you usually get 10-15 minutes to present to the judging panel. Obviously it will be on a virtual platform. Those of you that have had experience of doing that, we try and make it relaxed because we want to get the best out of the shortlisted applicants. But obviously it is questions that are asked to you. So you present your project initiative. Don't repeat what you've put in your application because everyone has read that. All your judges will have read that. but how do you draw out the real hearts and minds piece in this bit, your real compassion for your project? There's no PowerPoint, and that I suggested we have no PowerPoint because I think it's best. I want to hear from here, your heart, why you're really passionate about what it is you're doing. I don't want to just read a number of stats on a PowerPoint presentation. So show your passion, show your authenticity, that you really believe in what you're sharing, what you're doing, and that you really want to shout from the rooftops about how proud you are of what you're achieving. Also consider whether you want senior input. So entries are at every level, but sometimes it endorses your project or initiative if you've got that senior input into the presentation. And I'm not saying that your director has to pitch up and say how wonderful it is. It's really that they have supported and they're really behind it, and they're really engaged with you on your journey, and they've really supported and developed you through the process. And then remember, judges have several entries to see, so make sure you make an impact. And I've said that a few times, but that's really important. Most of all, be proud. As I say, we're very good at hiding our achievements in the workforce profession, but do be proud of what you've achieved. Do share everything that you're doing and speak from the heart. Show your passion, show why you feel you are an award winner and why you should win this category. Be workforce professionals with attitude, and by that I mean, you know, that strength of what difference you are making to patient care, to service user experience, etc. Compassionate and patient focused, and most of all, demonstrate how you've engaged your own heart and mind, but that of others in your project, and what difference it's making. So that's it from me. So I don't know, I'll go and look at the chat in a minute. So Shelley, if you've got anything you want to add just from your experience of being a judge.
So absolutely concur with all the things that Nikki was saying. For me, I have to connect with it on an emotional level. So starting off with the idea of inclusivity, thinking beyond ourselves and the way that we see the world to how others are, how others engage with that. And you use the word authenticity, Nikki. For me, it always shines through when it's genuine. You can see that the person really believes in it, that it means something to them, and that it's based on compassion. So when we have our patients, service users, citizens, carers at the heart of what we're doing, and that brings meaning to people, it all connects up. And I think the things that have stood out for me over the years are where there's been great engagement, where people have brought along service users and said how the changes that have been made have actually impacted on them. That building on the work that we're all familiar with of Professor Michael West, that whilst we're doing our work in HR and OD and learning and development, we are having an impact on the people who are delivering the services. And that in itself has an impact on how we have those outcomes within services. And it's those kind of things that really shine through for me. So the emotional engagement, and you also mentioned about creativity. So where there's innovation, seeing things again from a different perspective and looking at improving services. Often when we're in it, we can't see it. We know something needs to change, but when we helicopter above, when we get that big picture, and how do we get that? Again, we get that through engagement by asking people, how does it feel for you? And when we get that feedback, then we can think, oh, right, that's not quite as good as I thought it was. So we can be creative through engagement. And the final area that I would say as an occupational psychologist, that I like to have some kind of scientific linkage to do with the emotion and the warmth. So if you're able to highlight that this is based on some kind of theory and you're proving it, and again, that's really helpful if, like Nikki said, you may want to go on later and do some more research. Then if you've got a theory that you're basing it on and you're saying it either proves it or disproves it, but that's what got me thinking. I read about this and I thought, well, I'll try that out. I'll do an experiment. I started talking to people. It's something that captures our imagination. And for us as the judges, we think, yes, they've done this and they've explained it really well. They've drawn us in. And we know that that can be applied to other areas. So I always look for applicability. Where else can that be used? Because it means we can save money as well, get value for money, and share that learning across. So I really love doing it. So thanks for the opportunity of sharing my ideas with you.
Take myself off mute. Lisa, is there anything you want to build on? You've put some comments in the chat that might be helpful to share.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. And I mean, for me, this absolutely is one of the highlights of the year. I love being involved in HPMA, from supporting my team to look at what we're going to enter through to, being lucky enough to be a judge and just getting the chance to see some of the absolutely fantastic work that goes on across our sector. There's some points Nikki's made, which I just absolutely want to agree with. And I think I've got a couple of additional ones as well. Telling a story is so important, and thinking about the starting point for your story, because you're probably so embroiled and so embedded in this. The start for you might actually be 3 steps down the line as to where it could be if you were starting to tell it to a stranger. So the importance of story, but the importance of thinking about the starting point for your story. And the reality is, I don't know about Nikki and Shelley, but I'm probably reading these on a Sunday afternoon or a Wednesday evening in front of Coronation Street, and I need them to come to life. I need to see that emotion. I need to see that passion. And so how you tell that story with energy to make it jump off the page is just really, really important. Answer the question. That was probably one of the best bits of advice another judge gave me years ago. And you think it's really simple, but if you stop and you go back and you look at criteria, and Nikki's walked us through some of that, some of us at times don't answer the question that's asked and look at the criteria. And Lauren's just beaten me to it there, and I was pulling her leg saying, I'm going to make that point, because I genuinely have seen times where we leave sections completely empty and you just lose straight away, a number of points. And so even if you just give a section a go, try and do something, because you will get some level of recognition for that. I always think about language as well, and language is a wonderful thing, and we all use words or phrases, and we think we know what we mean, or we all talk about workforce and we have the same interpretation of that, but do we? And when I say workforce, what do I mean compared to when Nikki might use it? So just think about the words and the descriptors that you use, and that energy starts with how you entitle your submission. So, you see these really innovative, exciting projects and pieces of work, and then they have the most bland, boring descriptors that you can think of. One of the ones I've written down was, do we describe a project as transactional HR team, or do we actually start that excitement and energy from, delivering a first-class recruitment service, or innovating our recruitment practice? And just really think about how you describe your project to hook the judges in from the very beginning. The other thing is don't always think about the big projects, think about the small projects. And many a time, the entries that I've seen win can be those really small scale projects which have happened in teams and aren't necessarily the big organizational wide pieces of work. And there is as much value and as much merit in putting in something that's happened within a team or a service that has had as much impact, albeit for a small number of people, but you can take the learning and spread it elsewhere. And I would just say, don't ever, ever overlook the small scale pieces of work, because they can be just as valuable. One of the best things I think I ever did, and I often reflect on, is media training. And when I did my media training, we were taught to think about the narrative that runs through your presentation or your message, and what are the 2 or 3 things that when you're in front of a TV camera and you're being interviewed, what are the 2 or 3 messages that you absolutely need to land? And take that principle and apply it through your application as well. You know, Nikki talked a lot about the innovation category. What are the messages that would run through if that was your category that you were choosing to enter? And just a small example, Nikki, if I can. A few years ago, I was judging, I think it was the partnership category, and Merseycare came in, and it was the year Amanda and the team up at Merseycare won. And I remember the entry, and the team came in, and you know, you set the scene, and as we do, and we all turned to Amanda to begin, and this voice spoke up from the left-hand side of the room, and it was like, Amanda, oh, who's that? And it was the trade union colleague, the staff side lead, who led the presentation on that partnership entry. And that's really small, but something like that was just so powerful. Just, you know, how you present your written application, but how you make your pitch. And the entire panel turned to Amanda as the HR director, assuming she was going to lead that pitch. And the leadership role for that whole panel went to the staff side chair, which was just absolutely fantastic to see, and set the scene for that whole pitch. And lastly, for me, just manage your time when you're in there pitching. And Lauren and others have drilled it into me as a panel chair over the years. Keep to time, keep to time, keep to time. And, you know, we're given about 15 minutes, I think it is, Nikki. And, you know, if we're fulfilling our duties as chair, we do our very best to keep the time running. So prepare and plan, and your project and your entry will have far more impact if you sell it to us in that 15-minute slot, as opposed to us having to curtail you because you're running over. So just a real practical point to enter on. But good luck. It's just a fantastic opportunity. And as I say, I love it. Highlight of the year for me.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Shelley, for some really good snippets of advice. They're really helpful. So while you're all thinking of questions, I'm going to go to the chat and just see some of the comments. So we've got Lauren with us, who works for Chamberlain Dunn, who run the awards seamlessly. So it's all done behind the scenes, and they do a hell of a lot of work. So she's written there about address all the criteria, as Lisa's just said. The criteria are weighed equally. So at the shortlisting stage, so if you neglect one, then you lose out on perhaps 20% of your potential. So make sure you answer all criteria that are equally weighted. That's helpful. Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, so as Lisa was saying, don't leave sections empty. Answer all the sections. It's nice that you're a Corrie fan, Cheryl. We're all Corrie fans. Well, up north particularly, I'll say. So Lauren's suggesting, if you didn't see the virtual, so on our website, you can go onto the awards tab, and you can go and look at the video clips from last year's virtual ceremony. And Lauren's rightly saying that might help you think about how you frame your story. Don't overlook the categories you're entering either by, so Rising Star, Lifetime Achievement, for instance. So look at all the categories, as I said earlier. So is there questions at the panel? That's a question from Sharon. Yes. So we get you to present with passion and vigour, and then there may be questions on the back of what you've said, but also maybe to get underneath a bit more about you. So particularly for the director and deputy associate director, I tend to judge on those. You know, what will it mean to you to win? And that's about you sharing your heart, what it really would feel like to win that category. So it's same for others, not necessarily just those two categories. So what would it mean for you to win? You know, and how you might answer that is not just about you and your ego. It's about what you give back to the team and what it says about your organisation. Some people do talk about themselves quite a bit, not very often, but it's less about you and more about the team, isn't it? I would say, I would hope. So anybody want to sort of put their hand up, ask a question from anything you've heard, anything at all? Rachel?
Yeah, I just I've been a judge for a number of years, and I've also submitted applications in the past, and I think the thing that is one of the hardest aspects of the entry is demonstrating the impact, because like you say, you can have a very small innovative initiative that's had impact and depth for a smaller group of staff, or you can have a large organisational wide initiative that affects the whole organisation potentially, or even at a system level. And I suppose the issue is how you demonstrate that impact, and one of the questions is around impact on patient care, and that's the bit that how you demonstrate the link between what this initiative has achieved and that link to patient care and health and well-being. And I wondered if you had any tips around that.
Lisa.
There we are. Sorry, I couldn't unmute. It was just jammed. I think it's probably all about balance, isn't it? And each project is so different in its own right. And the best advice I can probably give you is just how you describe the impact and the return on investment within the context of the project. But I agree, it is one of the things that I think we all struggle with, and probably as a profession, it's part of our ongoing development and learning, isn't it, about that return on investment and how we measure. But I think we're getting better, and I would just say keep it within the context of your project.
Thanks, Lisa. Shelley, have you got any words of wisdom?
I don't know about words of wisdom, but I agree with what Lisa's saying. And it is difficult to measure and also to compare, as you were saying, Rachel, about the impact of one type of project. But almost when we're faced with them, when we read them, even though they may be very different, something that comes off the page is the inherent value of the time and effort that people have put in their commitment, and for me, how they've engaged with people and what that outcome is for them. So as judges, I think we think quite broadly, and we're not saying, oh, this is of more value than this. You could have a massive project where people have invested loads of money, but actually that doesn't really speak to you in the same way that something smaller does, where you can see how people have really engaged with colleagues, and they've looked at the impact on clinical services or whatever it is, or maybe to do with health and well-being. But I suppose you're not doing a scientific study. One thing I would say is that although we're looking for all of this evidence, in some ways it is quite subjective. If we pretended it's really objective, I think we'd be lying. And that's how I think giving people the tips about following the criteria and making sure that we've looked at all criteria, not just one criterion. And as Lauren says, and Lisa was saying earlier, answering the questions. But when we're weighing up the value of one project against another, it's the emotion that you put in, the dedication, what you're trying to do, how you've measured it, the return on investment. A small project can really do something miraculous almost for people that a massive investment of money can't do. So yeah, that's what I think. Sorry, Rachel.
I was just going to add to that. I think there's also the other aspect of that, of course, is the longevity of that project.
Yeah.
Oh, she's frozen.
Yeah, I think what Rachel's point about the longevity of the project and also the versatility of it, building on that, sometimes we see something that can be applied in all sorts of different settings. Sorry, I was picking up for you, Rachel, because you froze.
Sorry, I froze. But I don't know. You were
saying about longevity.
Yeah, it's the longevity. So you're looking at maybe for an evaluation over a period of time to demonstrate the impact, but equally you can have a high impact, shorter scale project that even in that time you can demonstrate the impact.
Yeah.
So it's just Just thinking about the different
COVID's a good example of
Yeah.
that, isn't it?
Yeah,
In the turnaround.
yeah, I think
So
so.
the other, I suppose, thing I would say is from a qualitative point of view, nothing beats. So sometimes nominations for particular awards come from a team member. So maybe for their director, their deputy, and when they speak and talk about what difference their project, their initiative, their leader has had on them personally, and getting their voice heard, particularly at the judging stage, can really bring it to life for you. And I've a couple of occasions, one with Rachel, she'll remember, and one with someone else last year, where we nearly cried in front of the shortlisted applicants because it was so emotional and so moving in terms of what difference they've made. So again, it's tapping into that emotional, as Shelley and Rachel said. So not just thinking about stats. Stats are important, but also think about qualitative impact. Cheryl, you got your hand up.
I think you might have just touched on what was going to be my question there, Nikki. I was just going to say that in terms of stats, sometimes you don't necessarily have the stats, and it's whether or not there's an equal weighting that's kind of placed against testimonials, qualitative feedback that has been solicited, you know, whether it's far and wide or within the relevant context, as opposed to being able to have some sort of scientific sort of measurable outcomes. And I guess it's whether or not people are put off by not entering because they don't think they've got the stats, but actually they have got lots of feedback, and some of it will be anecdotal that they can put their hands on and share as part of the evidence.
I think the biggest mistake is A, not to enter because you don't feel you've got it, but then enter and not allude to the return on investment, whether that's quantitative or qualitative. There is no hard and fast, we measure 50% qualitative, 50% quantitative. Say that when you've had a drink. There's no hard and fast rule. It's really how do you illustrate and demonstrate that your project, your initiative has had real impact. And most of that will come from, as you say, there'll be maybe some quantitative stats, but most of it is qualitative. It's what comes from your heart to share why you're proud, why you want to share the project that you're doing.
And if there are people that want to step forward to either support a testimonial, do they need to be named, or do you can just put the quotes in?
Yeah, and
maybe just state the organisation or something like that.
Yeah, and maybe if they've got a role, so say it was I don't know, a
or the role
versus a nurse director versus whatever. Yeah, just you don't need a name. Just need to understand the context within which they're sharing their testimony.
One of the other points, Cheryl, is that we have lots of stats that we take for granted. And if you're measuring against, so say you did something and then you were looking at the staff survey, or, you know, what's the data that we collect anyway? And how can you measure that over a period of time? And the point that Nikki made earlier about we may not feel ready to enter, but sometimes you might enter 1 year and then enter again, and you've got more, and it gives you some feedback from, well, like you didn't have quite enough data or whatever it was. But remember, there's lots of stats and stuff that we already take. How can you use those?
Yeah. Stella?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you've just answered my question, because I was going to ask, one, can you enter more than one category, you know, with two different projects? And the other thing is, previously we have entered with a project and didn't get shortlisted. And I think it was because not having enough of that measurable data around impact, and we might be in more of a place to do so this time. So I think my question was, can you re-enter something, you know, do it better this time? And the other question is, one of the projects we want to enter or may wish to consider to enter had to pause for a period of time because of the pandemic. And is that okay to still put that forward if, you know, there has been a pause moment in the delivery of?
Yeah, absolutely. You can put in for all categories if you wish, and you've got the energy to write all entries for all those categories. Lisa's put in the chat, there could be one project initiative that might fit a number of categories with a bit of tweaking. So don't be afraid to use one initiative, but in a number of categories. But don't use the same application for each one, because that will be, you'll be able to tell. And that's another, I suppose, don't use, so if you've entered awards for other organisations, don't just use that and put it in, because it may refer to the organisation that's doing the awards, and you think, well, that's not, they're not passionate about HPMA entry. See what I mean?
Yeah.
And yes, if you've put an entry in before and it's not got shortlisted, but you feel you've got more evidence or it's a stronger submission, then yes. So we don't get previous submissions to look at either. We just get the submissions for the year.
That previous project has continued and continues to continue and grow and take it to the next level. It's just we weren't shortlisted prior.
Yeah, and obviously we'll be very conscious of COVID in this round in terms of its impact that it could have had on some of the projects. So yeah, absolutely. So Sharon, I think Sharon Lord, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, sorry. It was just really looking at the return on investments again, but on the other side of it. So not particularly showing the data, although that's challenging. So are we also looking at cost of projects? Like you said, it could be something that's a huge cost or a small cost. And how much in detail do we go with that cost then? Do we go down to kind of, my hours in the project and admin and, how much, or is it just a high level, it costs this much and the majority of the cost was this?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, if that illustrates. So I suppose I'd ask Shelley and Lisa what their views are, but my view would be those that have had, say it's cost 50k and you've had 50k investment and you can demonstrate the return on investment to 75k, then clearly that's not a significant ROI and you've had money to support. Whereas those that come across more powerful are those that have had very little investment, only in terms, say only, but in terms of time, so how you've described it. So you say, the cost of this was the time of the HR manager, the OD facilitator, whatever it is. That was it. So it's just to illustrate, have you had lots of Josh chucked at it? So yes, you've made a huge difference. Yeah. For example, versus you've done a lot, but with very little investment. So you've proved the business case for potentially getting further investment down the line to broaden out the process, the project, the initiative. I don't know if you've answered that, Lisa or Shelley. Lisa?
So just to agree with that, Nikki, I would. I think sometimes, there's always an eye-catching headline, isn't there, around a huge return on investment, but sometimes the achievements as a result of a small financial input are the ones which stand out, and it's back to that passion and that energy and that commitment and that determination to see something through for a really clear cause.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
So just looking in the chat again, so we've talked about rejigging your criteria to enter other categories. Good point from Lauren. Clearly the HPMA is UK wide, so you may well have a Welsh, Northern Ireland or Scottish judge. So sometimes setting the context for them is quite helpful of your organisation. So very briefly, but just saying what the context is so they can understand that. So Lisa's put real practical point, look at the presentation of information. I agree with this. So when you're reading reams and reams of entries, ones that are easier to read to the eye, so nice and gentle on the eye, bullet points, spacing are, again, and that you're not judged on how you lay it out, but it's just something that makes the judge's life easy, so they're more likely to be more embracing of what you're submitting. So that's really good advice there. Yeah, so Lauren's judges log into a portal, so they see your submission answers as you lay it out, so it will come up as you've input it into the portal. So if you think about how it's laid out, that will make it easier to read. And yeah, some categories receive more entries than others. There are some that don't receive many, some that are inundated. So again, just think quite broadly about which categories you might want to enter. Sponsors, so we obviously work reliant on our sponsors on the awards, so they're involved in judging. So again, we're very good in the NHS, aren't we, at using jargon and shorthand and mnemonics, various things. So just be mindful. I suppose I'd say if your partner, friend was reading it, would they understand it having nothing to do with your organisation or your group of organisations? Because again, collaborative work, which I know a number of you do, not just in your organisation, but how you might have done something across a number of trusts or in a system, is helpful too. Any other questions from anyone? I'm enjoying this, it's good. God doesn't give me the opportunity to talk very often, do you, love? So, I mean, as we've said, it's, you know, having been an award, having been entered into an award by someone else, so I didn't know it was happening. It was very humbling, I have to say, and for somebody to recognise your talent, your abilities, things that you're doing, your input, your impact is, it really touches. I'm getting goosebumps just saying it. It really touches your heart. So just think about, you know, there are people, there'll be unspotted talent in your teams and people that are just work tirelessly day in, day out, doing the work that they're doing. This is a real opportunity to lift it up and share some of the great practice that happens out there. And you know, entering the award, it's hard work putting pen to paper or typing into the portal, but the reward you get just from entering it and sharing it with your team that you've entered for this award is impactful, let alone then being shortlisted. And then, you know, everyone's a winner in my eyes, but we have to choose a winner. So, you know, shout from the rooftops, really excellent practice. And, you know, COVID has, if it's taught us anything, it's taught us that we're at our rightful place at centre stage. So let's enjoy it, let's embrace it, let's celebrate, because we're too shy. I'm very shy, as you probably tell, but we are, and there's so much excellent world-class practice that private sector could learn from us that we're not sharing, that we need to share. So any more questions before so Robin's got the right idea. She's sat in a garden, I think, in the sunshine. Look at the wind blowing her hair.
No, you know, I'm sat at work and I was like, I am going to enjoy an hour of sunshine. So. Great
idea. You've got the right idea, Robin. So any final questions that anybody wishes to ask? Go on the website, have a look at previous entries, see what people put in for, and you'll say, we did that 16 years ago. Why didn't we enter the awards? But, you know, there'll be things that you're doing that other people will really value learning from. So it's about sharing and shouting in a nice way, obviously. Okay, no more questions? Very polite. She's a very polite group. You're not noisy or agitating or asking lots of questions because you're just taking it all in. So I'll get the list from Jo. We'll make sure that we share the slides, but I'll also have a look at which organisations you're from so that I can make sure you've entered the awards. This session has been helpful, and see what the return on investment of this webinar has had on whether you get shortlisted or not. Then we'll know if we've done a good job, Shelley and Lisa.
Oh, well, good luck, everyone.
Yeah,
good luck.
And there's some good points in the chat from Lauren.
Yeah.
About thinking about people in your region who you could nominate for a Lifetime Achievement Award. Don't think they'll be offended that you're saying that they're old. I received a Lifetime Achievement Award. It's like Nikki says, when you're nominated for something, you don't even know about it, from the British Psychological Society. And my first thought was, oh, I must be really old now. But don't think of that. Just nominate some people who really deserve it. But wishing everyone the best of luck and thank you for everything.
Yeah, sorry I missed those points in the chat. Thanks, guys. Good luck.
Thank you.
See you in
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye now. Bye.
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 Bye.